I'm a female from a small residential town in Canada, BC. Okay, my story is based around 2016 and 2017. I'm not sure of the months, but I know it was in the fall after around 2 weeks of working at the community school. Okay, the first few paranormal experiences that happened to me were in the Broad office, which is like a minute's walk from the back of the school. I knew I was in the Broad office alone because I always check to see if there's someone staying late. So after I checked around to make sure not to scare anyone, I went downstairs where there is a meeting room that was used for storage, open space for shelves to store files and whatnot, and the washroom in the back corner. So I usually clean the restroom first before I go back up to clean the offices upstairs. I cleaned the washroom, grabbed the garbage, and as I was leaving the washroom, I heard some lady I didn't recognize scream at me to the right side of me. I had my wired earphones hanging off of my ear to just hear my music. I know all the songs I have on that playlist. I looked over my shoulder to see no one standing in the dark corner. I swear, my heart almost stopped when I saw no one there. I booked it back up the stairs and calmed myself down. I went back to cleaning, but as I was walking around, I looked out the windows to see if there might have been someone outside, but no one was around. Another time, I went up to clean the Broad office. It was sometime in October, so it was getting darker earlier. I cleaned out the offices before I went down the stairs to the washroom. After I cleaned the washroom, I swept all the floors down there. As I was sweeping, I heard footsteps outside the stairs. I always lock the door when I'm in the Broad office, then heard the door unlock, open, then close. So I kind of yelled up to let whoever came inside know I was there, cleaning, and apologized if I scared them. But nothing. No other footsteps, no response back. I thought, okay, maybe they didn't hear me. So I repeated myself and walked up, saying hello. Nothing. I went to the front door to see if anyone was there. No one was there, but I did see the door unlocked when I knew I locked it behind me. So I said the hell with it, grabbing all the garbage in the hallway where I left it. I looked up towards the back offices, and one of the doors slammed shut. I ran out, locked it behind me, and went back to the school shaking so badly that I had a panic attack. Continuing from my last post, this part will be in the actual school. Just a reminder, this is a small community school in a small residential town in Canada, BC. Here's the idea of the layout. So I worked in the left wing of the community school, and there is a teacher's office next to a few classrooms, a storage room, and a door that leads downstairs to a furnace room, plus more storage room, plus more storage rooms. There are stairs that go down, then turn to the left, then 3 doors. I take my dinner break in the teacher's office. There is a table next to the door in the office. Okay, so I was on my dinner break, sitting at the table on the side of the doorway. I was having dinner and watching something on YouTube. I honestly can't remember what I was watching, but I do know it wasn't too loud. All of a sudden, I heard a few soft knocks on a door in the hallway, so I paused the video and looked out the doorway to see if someone needed me for something, but no one was there. So I sat there listening to see if it happened again for about a minute. Then, as I went to unpause the video, I heard scratching on the door right across the hallway from the office. So I got up to walk over to the furnace room door, holding onto my phone in case I had to call my manager. As I got close, I said, "Hello, you shouldn't be in there." I grabbed onto the doorknob to open it, but it was locked. It sounded like someone or something was moving around on the other side. So I started calling my manager, and as he picked up, there was a loud bang on the door. I jumped back as I kind of yelled into the phone, telling him what I thought was going on. I know there is another way into the furnace room, but you would need to break in. And yes, my manager heard the bang. I heard movement right behind the door, and it was in place, not going down the stairs. I tried to open the door again, yelling, "You can't be in there. If you leave now, I won't call the cops." The door opened this time, but nothing. The lights were off that whole time. I flicked them on, then looked down to see a shadow person's head leaning over from the corner. Pull back to hide. It was so weird because the lights were so bright that I should have seen the face clearly, but just the black shape. I closed the door to wait a few minutes for my manager to show up. I was shaking the whole time, thinking back on what just happened. The manager went down to check things out, then came back up to tell me there was no one down there and everything was locked. Plus, nothing was broken. Another time, on dinner break, one of my guy friends was covering one of the other janitors. We were in the same office having dinner, and we were watching our own videos on our phones, while another time, on dinner break, one of my guy friends was covering one of the other janitors. We were in the same office having dinner, and we were watching our own videos on our phones while eating. Yes, I already told him what happened to me. He's not a big horror fan like I am. While sitting there eating, I heard a long scratch on a door. I couldn't tell where it came from, but I had a hunch where it was. Looked at him and asked, "Did you hear that?" He nodded, looking shocked, so I paused my video. I opened the Spritebox app I had on my phone and started it. Yes, I was young and curious, wanting to find out whatever was there to tell us. After a few seconds, a few random words popped up. I don't remember all the words, but what stays with me to this day is anger, stares, and fire. We looked at each other, freaking out a little bit, then we looked towards the door. As I stood up, the door opened up slightly, so I told him to have the manager dialed into his phone just in case. I ran over to pull open the door, but I saw and heard nothing. The lights were left on this time. My friend slowly walked over as I stepped through the door to look down. No one was there this time, but I heard footsteps running into one of the rooms down there. So I started to go down the stairs, yelling, "Hey, you need to get out of here." Then I told my friend to call the manager. As I got to the corner, I saw one of the doors closing slowly, and before I could open it again, it was fully closed and locked. I yelled while knocking on the door, "Hey, who is in there? You need to leave." I heard no movement for a bit while I tried to open the door, but then I heard a loud bang behind me from another door, like someone was using both of their arms. I thought to myself, the hell with this. I started running back up the stairs, telling my friend to watch my back in case someone tried to come after me. As I got closer to him, he told me he saw the same thing I did before, but their arm was reaching out towards us. I just stepped onto the top stair and the lights went off. Thankfully, my friend moved back into the hallway, so I ran out, closed the door, and held it as our manager rushed towards us. We told him what happened, and then he checked things out. Nothing was wrong. But this time, there were small, soft scratches on the furnace room door. I bought my first house in 2003 and was over the moon. Shortly after moving in, two of my neighbors began joking with me about the ghost in my house. Well, I thought they were joking, so I just played along, pretending I had seen one and it was no big deal. Well, as time went on that summer, I met more and more of my neighbors, and they all brought up the same topic. Finally, an elderly woman on the block who was quite kind and friendly told me the story after I asked her. I knew she wasn't going to screw with my head, which is why I asked in the first place. It turned out the previous owner purchased the home, but never lived there, because she said it was haunted. Sounds in the night of footsteps and sobbing, and glimpses of a man sitting in the kitchen, covered in blood. One of my neighbors helped with the renovations of the house and said that he was putting up drywalls when he felt something lift up his dreadlocks. Though I've had paranormal experiences before, it had been years, and by then, I just chalked them up to night terrors. One day, I went to a small neighborhood video store to rent a movie. I had to fill out a form with my demographic data and then my credit card information. The owner of the store looked at the form and said, "Oh my God. You live in that house?" I asked her what she meant, and she explained that her former employee had committed suicide in my house. She came to the house as soon as she heard, but the house had been taped off by the police as a potential crime scene. She told me that he had just moved into the house with his partner and called his mom because he wanted to invite her over to meet his partner and come out to her. This was in the early 1990s, when being gay was a big deal. His mother already knew he was gay, because he bought a house with a man and disowned him right over the phone. That same week, he received a letter from an HIV testing center stating that he had tested positive for HI. This is when HIV was a death sentence. He then sat at the kitchen table, ate a bowl of cereal, and shot himself in the head with a revolver. Since then, she has had multiple paranormal experiences in the store, with videos flying off shelves and even levitating off shelves. The most I've experienced are sounds at night. Sounds of Cheerios being poured into a bowl. I don't eat cereal. And sounds of sobbing in the kitchen. I often awaken to both. I remember my grandmother saying, when the dead come to you, they want something. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them. So I did. I sat down at the kitchen table one night, lit a candle, and told him that each night I would recite a Novia prayer for him before a lit candle. On the 9th night of the first Novavna to St. Anthony, the patron saint of lost souls, I heard uncontrollable sobbing, felt a strong presence of grief and despair, and heard the sound of hyperventilating breathing, as though someone could not catch their breath. I sat in the presence of this, knowing it was not malignant, but rather a connection of intimacy and compassion, of which he was in need. For 45 days, I said a novena prayer before a lit candle for his soul, and had a mass said in his name. A few times, I had awakened to feel his presence standing over my bed, but I knew it was not a malignant presence. This still happens from time to time, but less and less frequently. In the early 1980s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help my brother and I become better men, and I have to say that I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures that many would never get to experience, and I am thankful for every experience that that life gave me, even the scary ones. While we lived in Japan, my father wanted us to have a fully immersive experience, so he chose to move us into a small Japanese neighborhood off base. We lived in a little house at the top of an enormous hill in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side, a fairly large cemetery. Our particular house was set far above the monkey habitats, about a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats, there was nothing but a thick Indiana Jones style jungle. The neighborhood kids and I would tromp through endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. We were the only American family living in that cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese families. And it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we couldn't communicate through language very well, we understood each other perfectly. Well, most of the time. Opposite us was an older couple with a lush garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama San, and she had us help her garden whenever she could coax us over with green tea and chocolate or banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else. Actually, we lived in a wonderful neighborhood. The only drawback to Mama's home, however, was that she directly overlooked the cemetery, and that cemetery was unlike any cemetery I had ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials don't happen very often. Instead, above-ground crypts are built. Many of them are built into the sides of the hills that make up the island. The crypts are large, made of huge arcs of polished stone, set over a large square of that stone, which has a square insert cut into the middle of it for the coffin to be placed inside. Once inside, the square is inset with another piece of polished stone just inside, leaving a kind of shelf on the outside so offerings could be made to lost loved ones. Yen, food, flowers, and incense are some of the offerings given. Below Mama San's house was a valley that swooped back up into another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills were covered with these crypts, and spiderwebbing up and down through the crypts were various stone steps that were old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama San asked me to come visit with her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me as the older brother. Intrigued and a bit proud, I agreed. She took me to the back of her garden, sat me on a thick wooden bench that was carved with scenes of fishermen and men with swords, and told me she had a story to tell. Mama San then disappeared for a few minutes and soon returned with a tray that held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colors of the evening sky as the sun began to set. Mama San said she had seen me, my brother, and some other kids daring each other to follow a stairway path down into the cemetery. You have to understand that the path from our little home area down to the cemetery consisted of hundreds of steps, many broken or cracked, in and out of bushes, and at a steep incline. It would be dangerous for anyone. But the real test was seeing how long we could take walking through the crypts at night. Mama San wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. Many years ago, during the war, Americans were thought to be devils. Monsters that would murder innocent citizens for no reason other than to kill that fear was the product of wartime propaganda, used to encourage young men to enter military service and farmers to fight alongside them. But many didn't. Many ran. And with nowhere to go and nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens hurled themselves off a cliffside rather than face torture at the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified to hear this. I had no idea this had happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness that I started to cry. The sun was setting and the sky went from pink and blue to a deep orange and red. Mama San reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry. This was in the past, and the past is something we must always remember, so we never go back. She went on with her story. One young woman had followed through with this sacrifice with her 2 children, but she survived the fall. She was in a coma for months. When she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realize she was not with her children. They had been buried somewhere in that cemetery below, in an unmarked crypt that held many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain. The torment of her loss was unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say she never found her children. Her act of suicide doomed her to purgatory. She would remain tortured for eternity. The sun had disappeared. The cemetery was drowning in inky blackness, and the main path was dotted with dim, broken lights, feebly illuminating small areas. Mama San continued. She still wanders the cemetery, she said, looking for her kids. You can hear her crying. And then she pointed down. I didn't want to, but I did. I looked. In the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, there was a white figure. At first, a bright white shimmer moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side, like it was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. Softly at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but Mama San held my hand and whispered that she wouldn't come up here. We were too far. But that is why we shouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to stay away. It's best to pray for her. Mama San said she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she will find her salvation. Needless to say, I never went down to that cemetery. Not once. And I never sat back there with Mama San again either. That was enough for me. I did, however, visit Suicide Hill. It's now called Peace Prayer Park out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there. I prayed for all the souls and for forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories, and sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people was overwhelming. I'll never forget my time there. I'd like to go back, to see if she's still there, wandering the graves, looking for her children. So let me start out by saying I enjoy writing. So this will be long. It is nonfiction though, but hopefully an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just starting to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman who always talks way too loud was literally whispering by the end of it, and she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this. I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother Victor, alias. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks, and it took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like mean houses, mean house. Ugly house. Mama, don't like. Scary house, mama. Don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks, so she chalked it up to the stress of the move. This house was ramshackle and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and until recently before we moved in, still had a working ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed. So my young, broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 80s. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100. Lol. I know all this because I've heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life. And there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents have told me it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our pit bull, Boss. She was hanging laundry and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going ape crazy from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off toward the water at full speed. Boss beat her there and dragged me out of the water himself. Although my mom was confused about how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim. She figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside. Victor was asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked in on us kids, Boss started going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping. Every baby gate is still shut and locked, but I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around, and bark at my mother, waiting for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her almost a mile and a half out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky driveway. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into the trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotting chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently, our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in at least one of the few thick stands of trees around. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything. I was just standing. She rushed over to me and, after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was here, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said I told her, with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here, terrified at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs, and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs and out with me. She demanded to know what children were and where the hell they were now. I looked at her dead, serious, and told her about the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs, and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said this same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me. So she was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there is no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road and in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2 and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she is still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but haven't yet decided I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery, because whatever those things were, I really don't think they were children. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and getting out from the military when President Bush ordered more troops into Iraq in 2003. I had just returned home to Austin, Texas, when I was summoned into my local National Guard unit at Camp Mabry and told that I was being recalled to the Army, but the unit was already tasked with deploying to Iraq. I was not part of their unit yet, so the commander offered to give me a waiver to deploy with a government contractor, Halliburton, in Houston. I knew that I would make more money as a contractor, so I took the offer. Not long after arriving in Kuwait at Camp Doha, I began working with the operations team, overseeing logistics affairs. We would oversee the daily convoy of supplies between Kuwait and Baghdad, a route riddled with it, incidents, small arms skirmishes, and almost constant breakdowns of Army and civilian vehicles. Because I was a saw gunner in the 1st Infantry Division while on active duty and was technically still in the Guard, I was often in the convoys, manning a mounted weapon that accompanied the mostly civilian convoys. During these runs, we had a few strange encounters in an area south of Baghdad known then as Camp Babylon, occupied by French troops, but then designated an archaeological site for obvious reasons. Camp Babylon was set up in the area that was said to originally have been inhabited by the famous Tower of Babel. Indeed, there were ruins there that did look like a massive structure once stood at that spot. I had two strange incidents happen to me while passing through there. The first incident seems a bit benign, but it sets the mood for the second. We were passing through Camp Babylon in the afternoon one day when our convoy took small arms fire, the SOP. At the time, standard operating procedure was to stop the convoy and return fire. This was because in the past, such incidents ended up with a long gunman attempting to scare the convoy into running into it. Because of this, the SOP changed to stop the convoy, dismount, and return fire. While engineers looked for explosive devices on the road, we scanned the horizon for enemies. Nothing. They most likely fled immediately. However, the ruins around Camp Babylon were alive with shadow figures that seemed to move about the area. Several times we would spot the figures, but they would immediately disappear. A contractor, lying beside me with his weapon, commented how odd that we are in the shadow of Babel and fighting the supernatural. I didn't respond, but I knew he was a 32nd degree Mason who was really into the arcane aspects of Babylon, etc. I didn't feel, at the time, that much was supernatural, but I certainly did see the shadowy and bizarrely small figures dart about the structures. Once the road was deemed clear, we continued on to Baghdad. The second incident occurred about a month later. At this point, the weather in southern Iraq and Kuwait had turned quite cold at night. During this encounter, we had just completed the supply run to Baghdad and were returning back to Camp Doha in Kuwait when a vehicle in our convoy broke down. Once again, we found ourselves at Camp Babylon. While the army mechanics took a look at the vehicle and the rest of us took up fighting positions around the area, strange things began to occur. It started with a strange light bobbing in the desert. Thinking it was a person with a flashlight, we used night vision goggles to watch. It was simply a glowing ball of light moving towards a set of ruins. After initial contact with the light, a few of us moved forward away from the convoy to see what the source was. After seeing it was self-contained and not a person, we were a bit alarmed. Then we heard a sound that I will never forget. A long wailing began from one of the ruined structures or foundations not far away. It sounded like a woman in agony, mixed with loneliness. On and on, the sounds went while we huddled in the cold and dark, wondering what the hell we were listening to. With our NVGs equipped, we used our flashlights to spotlight the ruins. If you've ever done this, you will know that a normal flashlight with NVs looks like a massive beam of light. We scoured the area, but no source of the wails or the ball of light was seen. About this time, we were told via radio that the vehicle was repaired and ready to roll, so we decided to return to the convoy. I was slinging my saw over my shoulder when I noticed my contractor partner was staring at the ruins in horror. He was frozen. I shook him, and he snapped out of his stupor, quickly leaving the area with the rest of us. Once we were back at the camp, and it was pleasantly daylight the following morning, several of us were chatting about the encounter at Camp Babylon before our daily operations briefing. It was then that I remembered the terrified expression on the face of the contractor. So I asked him about it. He was still obviously traumatized by the event, but managed to explain that as we were leaving our position on the sandy hill, he saw a tall black figure standing beside the ruins. It was watching us as we were looking for him, her or it. He said that he felt an instant wave of despair hit him and thought that he was going to die. He didn't remember leaving the area. His next memory was of the Humvee headed back to Kuwait. I now write non-fiction books about haunted places for Llewellyn Publishing and have visited hundreds of reputedly haunted spots. But I'll never forget the wailing figure at the ruins of Babel. It's also worth noting that when I related this story to some of our Pakistani employees at Camp Doha and Camp Aref Jan, they were also quite horrified. One of them, a translator we called Artie, said that we had encountered a D-Jinn, or a damn spirit, and that we were lucky to be able to tell the tale. I agree.